Danielle Carter thought she was just meeting a friend outside a luxury hotel in Chicago. Educated, composed, and quietly strong, she stood waiting, until whispers turned into suspicion. A security guard stepped in, mistaking her presence for a threat. And in a single moment, humiliation replaced dignity. But Danielle refused to stay silent. What followed would expose more than one man's mistake. It would reveal a truth many try to ignore. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe some heroes are willing to look guilty to save the innocent, this story is for you. A cold wind moved through downtown Chicago, weaving between glass towers and busy intersections as the late afternoon light softened into a pale gray glow. The sky hung low, heavy with clouds, and the sidewalks carried the restless rhythm of people heading home, chasing time, or simply trying to stay warm. Danielle Carter walked against that rhythm. She kept her hands tucked deep inside the pockets of her long charcoal coat, her shoulders slightly drawn inward, not from fear but from habit. At 26, Danielle was a woman who had learned how to carry herself with quiet control. She stood at a medium height with a slim, balanced build, her posture naturally upright even when her mind wandered. Her skin was a deep, smooth brown, glowing softly under the dim city light. Her face had gentle, defined lines, a soft oval shape, full lips often pressed in thought, and dark brown eyes that seemed to observe more than they revealed. Her hair, tightly coiled and carefully maintained, was pulled back into a low bun at the nape of her neck, practical and neat. She dressed simply, but with intention. A clean blouse beneath her coat, tailored pants, and polished shoes that clicked softly against the pavement. Nothing about her appearance demanded attention, yet everything about her presence felt deliberate. Danielle was a financial analyst at a mid-sized investment firm in Chicago. She had earned her position through years of discipline, late nights, early mornings, and a refusal to settle for less than she deserved. Her income was stable, her life organized, her future, on paper, secure. And yet, as she walked, there was a quiet emptiness that followed her like a shadow. Her eyes drifted across the city, but she wasn't really seeing it. Instead, she was remembering. The subtle pauses in conversations when she entered a room, the way people sometimes looked at her. Not openly hostile, not always obvious, but present enough to feel. The moments when her competence had to be proven twice, sometimes 3 times, before it was accepted. The quiet assumptions that clung to her, unspoken, but persistent. Danielle had learned not to react. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make scenes. She worked harder, spoke clearly, and moved forward. But today, something felt heavier. She slowed her pace slightly, stopping at a crosswalk as the light turned red. Cars rushed past, headlights flickering in the early evening gloom. Around her, strangers stood close but distant, each lost in their own world. Danielle exhaled slowly. Maybe I'm just tired, she thought. A soft vibration interrupted her thoughts. Her phone. She pulled it from her coat pocket, glancing at the screen. The name that appeared made her eyebrows lift slightly. Claire Whitman. Danielle answered. "Hey!" Claire's voice came through bright and energetic, almost cutting through the cold air around her. "Danny, where are you right now?" Danielle turned slightly, scanning the street as if the answer might be written somewhere in front of her. "Downtown, just walking." "Why?" There was a brief pause, followed by a hint of excitement in Claire's tone. "I need you to come meet me. I'm at the Grand Lake Hotel, downstairs in the lobby." Danielle frowned slightly, her expression shifting from distant to curious. "The Grand Lake? That's fancy," she said, half amused. "What are you doing there?" Claire laughed softly, but there was something in it, something held back. "Just come, okay? I promise it'll be worth it." Danielle tilted her head, studying the silence that followed. Claire wasn't usually this vague. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's more than okay," Claire replied quickly. I want you here." That was enough. Danielle didn't ask more questions. "All right," she said, "I'm on my way." She ended the call and stood still for a moment, looking down at her phone before slipping it back into her pocket. Claire Whitman had been her closest friend since college. Unlike Danielle, Claire had grown up in a small suburban town. She was a white American woman, 26, with a naturally warm and open presence. She had shoulder-length blonde hair that she often wore loose, slightly wavy, framing a soft round face dotted with faint freckles. Her blue eyes carried an easy kindness, and her smile came quickly, sometimes too quickly, as if she believed every situation could be softened with warmth. Claire stood at an average height with a slim build, her posture relaxed, her movements unguarded. She worked in event coordination. Creative, social, always surrounded by people. Where Danielle was measured and composed, Claire was expressive and spontaneous. But what made Claire different wasn't just her personality. It was her awareness. During their college years, Claire had witnessed moments, small, sharp moments, where Danielle had been treated differently. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. Claire had never ignored it. She had asked questions. She had listened. And over time, she had become someone who didn't just believe in fairness, but actively stood for it. Danielle trusted her. Completely. Still, something about that call lingered. "She's hiding something," Danielle thought, a faint smile touching her lips. The crosswalk signal changed. Danielle stepped forward. Her pace quickened now, her direction clear. The city around her seemed to shift slightly, not physically, but in how she moved through it. Her thoughts were no longer drifting aimlessly. They had a destination. As she turned down a broader avenue, the buildings grew taller, the storefronts more polished. The people here dressed differently, sharper, more curated. The energy changed. The Grand Lake Hotel was only a few blocks ahead. As she walked, her mind wandered again, but this time, not toward the past. Toward Claire. What could be so important? Claire wasn't the type to create drama. If anything, she avoided it. Unless... Danielle's steps slowed slightly as a thought crossed her mind. Is she serious about someone? Claire had dated before. Short relationships, nothing lasting. But recently she had been quieter about her personal life, less sharing, more private. Danielle had noticed, but she hadn't pushed. Now, the pieces didn't quite fit, but they were starting to form something. She adjusted her coat slightly, the wind brushing against her face as she turned the final corner, and then she saw it. The Grand Lake Hotel. It stood tall and polished, its glass entrance reflecting the dimming sky. Warm, golden light spilled out from inside, contrasting sharply with the cold gray of the street. Well-dressed guests moved in and out, their footsteps confident, their conversations low and contained. Danielle paused for just a second, not because she didn't belong, but because she knew. Places like this came with expectations, unspoken ones. She straightened slightly, her expression calm. Then she walked forward. The moment Danielle stepped through the glass doors of the Grand Lake Hotel, the world outside seemed to dissolve behind her. The cold wind, the gray sky, the restless noise of Chicago, all of it was replaced by warmth, quiet, and a kind of controlled elegance that felt carefully curated. Soft golden light reflected off polished marble floors. The air carried a faint blend of expensive perfume and freshly cut flowers. Everything inside moved at a slower, more deliberate pace. Danielle paused and eyed, just a fraction of a second, not out of hesitation, but to take in the space. Then she walked in. Her shoes made soft, measured sounds against the floor as she moved a few steps forward and stopped near the entrance, just off to the side. She didn't want to block anyone's way. She didn't want to draw attention. She simply waited. Her eyes moved calmly across the lobby, scanning faces, looking for Claire. Guests passed by in tailored coats and formal wear, their conversations low and polished. A man in a dark suit checked his watch. A couple laughed softly near the reception desk. A bellhop rolled a cart of luggage across the floor with quiet efficiency. Danielle stood still, her posture relaxed but composed. At first, nothing felt unusual. Then came the first glance. A brief one. A woman walking past slowed just slightly, her eyes flicking toward Danielle before quickly looking away. It was subtle, so subtle that someone else might not have noticed, but Danielle did. She had learned to notice these things. She shifted her weight gently, her gaze lowering for a moment before lifting again, pretending not to see. Another pair of eyes followed. This time, two men near the lounge area, both dressed in business attire. One leaned slightly toward the other, whispering something under his breath. Their eyes moved toward Danielle, then away, then back again. Danielle kept her face neutral. She had been here before. Not in this hotel, but in this feeling. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone, glancing at the screen more for comfort than necessity. No new messages, no missed calls. Claire was still not here. Danielle looked up again, and that's when she noticed the young woman sitting alone near the far side of the lobby. Her name was Emma Collins. Emma was in her early 20s, perhaps 23, with a slender build and a slightly reserved posture, as if she were used to observing rather than participating. Her light brown hair fell straight past her shoulders, parted neatly to one side, and her pale skin contrasted with the dark green sweater she wore. Her eyes, soft gray, were focused, thoughtful, and quietly attentive. Emma had always been that kind of person. She noticed things. She worked as a freelance writer, often sitting in public spaces like this one, collecting fragments of real life to turn into stories. Growing up in a small town, she had once believed the world was simple. But moving to the city had changed that. She had seen enough to understand that what people did and say often mattered more than what they did. And right now, she was watching Danielle, not with suspicion, but with curiosity and something closer to concern. Emma had seen the way people were looking. She didn't like it. Danielle, unaware of Emma's quiet attention, remained near the entrance. She adjusted her coat slightly, her fingers brushing against the fabric as if grounding herself. Her expression stayed calm, but there was a faint tension in her shoulders now, barely visible, but present. Time passed. A minute. 2. 5. And with each passing moment, the atmosphere around her shifted. Almost imperceptibly, but enough. The whispers began to take shape. "She doesn't look like she belongs here." The voice was low, almost hidden beneath the hum of the lobby, but it carried. Danielle heard it. Her eyes didn't move. She didn't react. Another voice followed, slightly sharper. "Why is she just standing there?" A pause. "Has she been here long?" Danielle inhaled slowly. She had two choices: acknowledge it or ignore it. She chose silence. Because silence was safer. Because silence was easier. Because silence was what she had learned. Across the lobby, behind the reception desk, a young employee hesitated. Her name was Sophia Ramirez. Sophia was 24, with a petite frame and a careful, attentive demeanor. Her dark hair was tied back into a neat bun, and her uniform was pressed perfectly, as if she believed that order in appearance could create order in everything else. She had grown up in a working-class neighborhood, raised by parents who had taught her the importance of respect, humility, and keeping her job no matter what. And right now, she didn't know what to do. She had noticed Danielle the moment she walked in, not because there was anything wrong, but because of how others were reacting. Sophia glanced toward her manager's office, then back at Danielle. Her fingers hovered slightly above the desk. Should she say something? Ask if Danielle needed help, or would that make things worse? Her uncertainty held her in place. Back near the entrance, Danielle shifted again, her gaze now fixed somewhere ahead, unfocused. She wasn't really looking at anything anymore. She was listening. Feeling. The air had changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't direct. But it was there. A quiet pressure, a question hanging unspoken in the room. What is she doing here? Danielle pressed her lips together slightly, her jaw tightening just enough to feel. She reminded herself, I'm just waiting. That was all. Nothing more. Nothing suspicious. Nothing wrong. Her phone remained in her hand now, her thumb brushing lightly across the screen without opening anything. It was a small gesture, something to occupy herself, something to anchor her presence in something normal. A group of guests walked past her, their voices dropping as they neared. One of them, a tall man in his 40s with a sharp jawline and neatly combed gray hair, glanced at her briefly, his expression unreadable. Beside him, a woman in a long beige coat leaned slightly closer, whispering something that Danielle couldn't fully hear. But she didn't need to. She already knew. Across the room, Emma shifted in her seat. Her brows furrowed slightly. This wasn't right. She could feel it. She reached slowly into her bag and pulled out her phone, not raising it yet, not recording, just holding it. Watching. Waiting. Back at the reception desk, Sophia exhaled quietly. Her eyes moved again toward Danielle, then toward the guests, then back. She took a small step forward, then stopped. Fear held her there. Fear of doing the wrong thing, fear of saying the wrong thing, fear of losing control of a situation she didn't fully understand, and so she did nothing. Danielle remained where she was, still, composed, waiting. But now the waiting felt different, longer, heavier, more visible, and though she kept her head high, her eyes steady, and her voice silent. The room had already begun to decide who she was, before she had even spoken. The silence in the lobby didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, almost unnoticed at first, like a shift in temperature. Conversations softened, movements slowed, and the subtle tension that had been building around Danielle began to take a more defined shape. Then it happened. A man stepped forward. His name was Richard Hale, the senior security officer of the Grand Lake Hotel. He was in his early 50s, tall with a broad, rigid frame that suggested years of physical discipline. His hair, once dark, had thinned and turned a dull gray, cut short in a no-nonsense style. His face was square, with deep lines etched around his mouth and eyes, lines that spoke less of kindness and more of control. His gaze was sharp, almost probing, and his posture carried a quiet authority that demanded attention without asking for it. Richard had spent over 2 decades working in security, first in private firms, then in hospitality. Over the years, his instincts had hardened. He trusted patterns more than people, appearances more than explanations. Experience, in his mind, had taught him that hesitation meant suspicion, and that acting quickly prevented problems, but experience had also made him rigid, and sometimes wrong. He approached Danielle with measured steps, stopping just a short distance in front of her. "Ma'am," he said, his voice firm but not loud, "what are you doing here?" Danielle looked at him calmly. Her expression didn't change. "I'm waiting for a friend." Her tone was steady, clear, and respectful. For a brief moment there was a pause. Richard studied her, not listening, assessing. "You've been standing here for a while," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "We've had reports." Danielle blinked once, slowly. "Reports?" she repeated, her voice still controlled. "I just got here a few minutes ago." Richard didn't respond immediately. His jaw tightened just slightly. Behind him, a few guest sets had stopped walking. Others pretended to continue their conversations, but their attention had shifted. The air grew heavier. Danielle could feel it. Still, she didn't raise her voice. "I'm meeting someone," she said again, "that's all." But something had already shifted in Richard's mind. He stepped closer. Too close. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to move along," he said, his tone now more directive than conversational. Danielle's brows drew together faintly. "I'm not doing anything wrong," she replied. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Richard exhaled through his nose, a subtle sign of impatience. "Let's not make this difficult," he said. And then he reached for her arm. It happened quickly. His hand closed around her forearm, firm and unyielding, as he began to pull her slightly to the side. Danielle's body reacted before her mind did. She instinctively pulled back. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice sharper now, no longer quiet. But the motion had already caused friction. Her skin scraped lightly against the rough edge of his grip. A thin, sudden sting shot through her arm. She gasped softly, not from pain alone, but from the shock of it. And then, everything stopped. The lobby fell silent. Not quiet. Silent. Every conversation ceased. Every movement paused. Every pair of eyes turned. Danielle stood still, her arm slightly drawn back, her breathing controlled but tighter now. A faint red mark had already begun to form along her skin, not deep, not severe, but visible enough. Richard released her, but his posture remained firm, unyielding. For the first time there was uncertainty in the room. Not everyone was comfortable anymore. Across the lobby, Emma Collins had already raised her phone. She hadn't planned to, but the moment she saw the way his hand grabbed Danielle, the way Danielle reacted, something inside her shifted from observation to action. Emma's fingers steadied around her phone as she began recording. Her expression focused, her lips pressed together. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't reacting outwardly. She was documenting. Because she knew, instinctively, that this moment mattered. Back at the reception desk, Sofia Ramirez froze. Her eyes widened slightly as she saw what had just happened. Her heart began to beat faster. This wasn't subtle anymore. This wasn't something she could ignore. She took a step forward, her body leaning slightly out from behind the desk, but then she stopped. Her gaze flicked toward the back office. Her manager wasn't there. Richard was senior staff. If she interfered, what would happen? Her fingers tightened slightly against the edge of the counter. Fear won. Again, she stayed where she was. Near the center of the lobby, Danielle slowly lowered her arm, her eyes now fixed on Richard. Her calm hadn't disappeared, but it had changed. There was something sharper beneath it now. "I told you," she said, her voice steady but firmer than before. "I'm waiting for someone." Richard didn't immediately respond. For a brief moment, he seemed to hesitate, not because he believed her, but because the room was watching now. The situation was no longer private. It had become visible, and visibility changes everything. Still, his expression hardened again. "You can't just stand here," he said. "This is a private property." Danielle held his gaze, her shoulders squared slightly, not aggressively, but with quiet resolve. "I'm a guest," she replied, "just like everyone else here." A murmur moved through the room, small but present. The balance was shifting. Emma adjusted her phone slightly, ensuring the frame captured both of them clearly. A man standing nearby, a middle-aged guest with glasses and a hesitant demeanor, shifted uncomfortably, his eyes moving between Danielle and Richard. He didn't speak, but his posture suggested doubt. Not everyone was certain anymore. Not everyone agreed. Danielle could feel it, but she didn't look away. She didn't step back. She stood her ground, not loudly, not dramatically, but firmly. And in that stillness, in that refusal to move, something began to change. Not the situation, not yet, but the perception of it. For the first time since she had entered the lobby, Danielle was no longer just someone being watched. She was someone being seen. For a few seconds after the silence fell, no one moved. It was the kind of silence that pressed against the air, thick, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore. Danielle could feel every pair of eyes on her now, not just watching, but waiting to see what she would do next. Her arm still stung faintly where Richard had grabbed her. The mark wasn't severe, but it was enough to remind her that something had crossed a line, And for the first time since she stepped into the hotel, Danielle didn't step back. She straightened, not dramatically, not with anger, but with intention. Her shoulders lifted, her spine aligned, and her chin rose just slightly, not in defiance but in clarity. Her eyes, dark and steady, locked onto Richard. When she spoke, her voice trembled for only a fraction of a second. "I did nothing wrong." The words were simple, but they carried through the lobby with a quiet force that made people shift where they stood. Richard didn't respond immediately. He held his ground, his expression firm. But there was a flicker, just a flicker, of uncertainty behind his eyes now. The situation was no longer under his control. Danielle took a small step forward, not toward him, but into her own space. "You don't get to treat me like this," she continued, her voice steadier now. "You don't get to put your hands on me because you decided I look suspicious." A ripple moved through the room. Subtle but undeniable, phones were no longer hidden. They were raised. Across the lobby, Emma Collins adjusted her grip on her phone, her breathing controlled, her focus sharp. She had moved slightly closer now, careful not to draw attention to herself, but determined not to miss a single detail. This was no longer just something she was observing. This was something she needed to capture. Emma had always believed stories mattered, but moments like this, these were the ones that changed people. Near the reception desk, Sofia Ramirez felt her heart pounding. This was different. Danielle wasn't just standing there anymore, she was speaking, and somehow, that made everything feel more fragile. Sophia glanced around the room, noticing how many phones were now pointed toward the center of the lobby. The quiet order she had been trained to maintain was gone. In its place was something unpredictable. She took a breath, her hands tightening slightly. Still, she didn't move. Back at the center, Danielle continued. "I told you I'm waiting for a friend," she said. "That's all I've been doing, standing here, not bothering anyone, not breaking any rules." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Each word was placed carefully, deliberately. Richard shifted his weight slightly, his posture still rigid, but less certain now. He opened his mouth as if to respond, but stopped. Because now, people were watching him, not just seeing him, judging him. Danielle held his gaze, and "You grab me," she said, her voice tightening just slightly, not with anger, but with controlled emotion. "Without reason." A faint murmur spread again, this time louder. A few guests exchanged glances. One woman near the back shook her head quietly. A man in a dark coat lowered his phone slightly, his expression more thoughtful now than suspicious. The narrative was shifting. Danielle could feel it. And she didn't stop. "I want an apology," she said. The words landed differently, not as a request, but as a statement. Richard's jaw tightened. "This isn't," he began, but Danielle didn't raise her voice to interrupt him. She simply continued. "If you don't apologize," she said, "I will take legal action." That changed everything. The room reacted. Not loudly, but noticeably, a shift in posture, a change in expression. The situation was no longer just uncomfortable. It was serious. Emma's phone captured every word. Her fingers moved quickly, adjusting the angle, ensuring Danielle's face was clear, her voice unobstructed. She could already feel it. This wasn't just a moment. This was something that would travel. Fast. Near the edge of the lobby, another figure had begun to pay attention. His name was David Lynn, a 32-year-old corporate attorney visiting Chicago for a conference. He stood at an average height with a lean build, his posture naturally composed, his dark hair neatly styled, and his sharp features softened slightly by a pair of thin-framed glasses. David had built his career on precision, on understanding how moments like this could unfold legally, socially, publicly. And right now, he was listening carefully, not speaking, just observing. Danielle's words had caught his attention, legal action that wasn't empty, not with the way she was speaking. Back at the center, Richard exhaled sharply. "You're making this into something it's not," he said, his voice lower now, less authoritative than before. Danielle didn't react to the tone. She didn't step back. She didn't soften. "No," she replied. "I'm responding to what it is." That line hung in the air. Clear. Unavoidable. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't empty. It was full of awareness, full of consequence. Around them, more phones were raised. Some guests whispered, not with suspicion now, but with uncertainty. Others remained still, watching, processing. Emma lowered her phone slightly for just a moment, her thumb already moving across the screen. She opened a social media app. Uploaded the clip. Her caption was short. No exaggeration, no opinion. Just the truth of what she saw. Then she hit post. Within seconds, the first notification appeared. A like, then another, then more. Back in the lobby, Danielle stood exactly where she had been. But everything around her had changed. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer just someone being questioned. She had taken control of the narrative, not by shouting, not by reacting, but by refusing to be silent. And in doing so, she had forced everyone else to listen. The tension in the lobby had reached a breaking point, but no one moved first. Danielle still stood where she was, her posture steady, her voice now quiet again after the weight of her words had settled into the room. Around her, the silence carried something different now. Not judgment, not suspicion, but uncertainty. People were no longer sure what they were witnessing. And then, a soft, mechanical sound. The elevator doors opened. It wasn't loud, but in that moment, it felt like it echoed through the entire space. Heads turned instinctively. Conversations, already fragile, fell away completely. From inside the elevator, a woman stepped out quickly, her eyes scanning the lobby with urgency. "Danielle!" Claire Whitman's voice cut through the silence, clear and unmistakable. She moved fast, almost running, weaving between guests without hesitation. Her expression was no longer playful or mysterious like it had been on the phone. It was tense, worried, and focused entirely on one person. Claire looked exactly as Danielle remembered, but more alive in motion. Her blonde hair, loosely tied back now, had slipped slightly out of place, strands falling around her face. Her cheeks were flushed, not from the cold, but from urgency. She wore a tailored beige coat over a simple dress, elegant but not overly formal, and low heels that clicked sharply against the marble floor as she moved. She reached Danielle within seconds. "Are you okay?" Claire asked, her voice soft but filled with concern, her eyes immediately dropping to Danielle's arm. Danielle blinked, just once, the shift in energy catching up with her. "I'm fine," she said quietly, but Claire's expression didn't relax. She turned slightly, her gaze moving past Danielle and landing directly on Richard. Something changed in her face. Not anger, not yet, but recognition, because Claire wasn't just observant. She understood people, and she understood what had just happened, without needing it explained. Behind her, another figure stepped out of the elevator. His presence was different, calmer. He didn't rush, he walked. His name was Michael Hayes. He was in his early 40s, tall, with a composed, athletic build that spoke of discipline without aggression. His dark hair was neatly styled, touched lightly with gray at the temples, and his face carried a quiet authority. Sharp features softened by a controlled, measured demeanor. His eyes, a deep hazel, moved quickly across the room, taking in details with practiced precision. Michael wore a perfectly fitted navy suit, the kind that didn't draw attention through flash, but through quiet confidence. Everything about him suggested control, structure, and responsibility, because he carried all three. Michael Hayes was the general manager of the Grand Lake Hotel, and in that moment, he understood. Not everything, but enough. His gaze moved from Danielle to Richard, to the phones raised around the room, and then briefly to Claire. He didn't speak yet. He observed. That was his instinct. Years of managing people, handling situations, resolving problems. It had taught him that the first few seconds mattered most. Not for reaction, but for understanding. Claire turned slightly toward him, her voice lower now, but still urgent. "Michael," she said quietly, "this is Danielle, my best friend." There was a brief pause. Then she added, her voice softening just slightly, despite the tension. "I wanted to surprise her. He's my fiancé." The words landed gently, but their impact was immediate. The room shifted. Visibly, people who had been watching Danielle with suspicion now looked at her differently. Not because she had changed, but because their understanding of her had. A few guests exchanged glances. One man lowered his phone. Another took a small step back. Near the reception desk, Sofia Ramirez felt her breath catch slightly. Her eyes widened. The pieces clicked into place in her mind, and with them came a wave of realization that made her stomach tighten. This wasn't just a guest. This was someone connected to the highest level of the hotel. And she had done nothing. Across the lobby, Emma Collins didn't stop recording, but her expression changed. Not surprised, not shocked, but aware. This was the turning point. Back at the center, Danielle stood still, her eyes moving briefly toward Michael for the first time. She hadn't known. About him, about this, but that didn't matter, because what had happened had already happened. Claire stepped closer to Danielle, her body angled slightly protectively now, her presence no longer just friendly, but supportive. Michael finally stepped forward. His movements were controlled, deliberate. He didn't rush, didn't react outwardly, but the focus in his eyes had sharpened. He stopped a few feet away from them. "Good evening," he said, his voice calm, even, but there was something beneath it. Authority. Not loud, not aggressive, but unmistakable. His gaze moved to Danielle. "I'm Michael Hayes," he said, "General Manager here." Danielle gave a small nod. Her expression remained composed, but her eyes held his. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Michael turned his head slightly, toward Richard. The shift was subtle, but it changed everything. "Can you explain what's happening?" Michael asked. His tone didn't accuse. It didn't assume, but it demanded clarity. Richard straightened instinctively, his posture tightening as if trying to reclaim control. "It's a routine situation," he said quickly. "She's been standing here and we received concerns." Michael didn't interrupt, but his eyes didn't move, and that was enough to make Richard hesitate, because for the first time, he wasn't the one in control of the situation anymore. He was being evaluated, not just by the room, but by someone who understood exactly what this meant. Claire looked between them, her jaw tightening slightly. She didn't speak again. Not yet, because now, this wasn't her moment. It was Danielle's, and it was Michael's. The lobby remained silent. Still. Watching. Waiting. Everything had changed in a matter of seconds. Not the event, but the truth behind it. And in that truth, the weight of what had just happened became impossible to ignore. The silence in the lobby did not fade. It deepened. Michael Hayes stood still for a moment after Richard's explanation, his expression unreadable, his posture composed. But those who knew how to read people could see it. The shift behind his eyes. He had already reached a conclusion, not based on emotion, based on principle. Michael had spent years building the reputation of the Grand Lake Hotel. He believed in order, in professionalism, in consistency. But more than that, he believed in something most people in positions like his claimed but rarely upheld when it mattered: fairness. And right now, in front of him, that principle had been broken. His gaze moved once more from Richard to Danielle, briefly taking in the faint mark on her arm, the controlled steadiness in her posture, and the silence she had chosen instead of chaos. That told him everything he needed. He turned back to Richard. "You're done," Michael said. The words came calmly. Too calmly. For a moment no one reacted, not because they didn't hear, but because they weren't sure they understood. Michael continued, his voice firm, leaving no room for interpretation. "Effective immediately." The weight of the statement settled instantly. Richard's face tightened. "What?" he said, the word slipping out before he could stop it. Michael didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You used unnecessary force on a guest," Michael said, "and you made a judgment without evidence." Richard straightened, his instincts pushing him to defend himself. "I was following protocol," he replied quickly. "We had concerns." Michael cut him off, not loudly, but decisively. "No," he said, "you acted on assumption." The distinction mattered, and everyone in the room felt it. Richard opened his mouth again, but no words came out this time. For the first time since he had approached Danielle, he looked uncertain. Not in control, not authoritative, just exposed. Michael held his gaze for a second longer. Then he turned slightly toward the reception desk. Sophia. The name alone made Sophia Ramirez straighten instantly, her heart jumping into her throat. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice small but clear as she stepped forward from behind the desk. Michael's tone remained even. "Please contact HR and security supervision, Mr. Hale is to be escorted out and his access revoked." Sophia nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the phone, but she didn't hesitate this time, because now the right thing was clear. 2 additional security staff members approached from the side hallway, called silently through internal communication. One of them was Marcus Reed, a younger guard in his early 30s with a strong but calm presence. Unlike Richard, Marcus carried himself with a quieter demeanor. He had a solid build, dark skin, and thoughtful eyes that suggested patience rather than suspicion. His movements were measured, respectful. He didn't look at Danielle, he looked at Richard. "Sir," Marcus said gently, "we need you to come with us." There was no force, no urgency, just finality. Richard hesitated, then slowly he nodded, not in agreement, but in resignation. He walked away, and as he did, the lobby remained completely silent. No one spoke, no one moved, because what had just happened was undeniable. Michael let a few seconds pass before turning back. This time toward Danielle, his expression softened, not dramatically, but enough to show sincerity. "I'm deeply sorry," he said. The words were direct, clear. "This does not represent who we are." Danielle met his gaze. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She studied him, not his position, not his authority, but his intent. And she saw something real, not perfection, but accountability. "I hear you," she said quietly. Her voice carried neither anger nor relief, just honesty. Claire, standing beside her, exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing just slightly for the first time since she had entered the lobby. Her hand hovered near Danielle's arm, not touching, but present, supportive. Around them, the atmosphere shifted again. This time not with suspicion, not with tension, but with awareness. People lowered their phones slowly. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others remained still, processing what they had just witnessed. Across the room, Emma Collins lowered her phone completely. Her screen lit up with notifications, dozens now, climbing rapidly. She glanced down briefly. Shares, comments, messages. The video had spread. Faster than she expected. She opened the post. People were already reacting, some expressing shock, others anger, many recognition. Emma hesitated for a moment, then began typing. Her message was simple, not dramatic, not exaggerated, just honest. This is what bias looks like in real time. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, and acts anyway. She hit post, and within seconds, the engagement doubled. Back near the reception desk, Sophia finished her call, her hand steadier now. She looked toward Danielle again, this time not with hesitation, but with something closer to regret. She had seen it, and she hadn't acted. That realization stayed with her. Nearby, David Lynn adjusted his glasses slightly, his expression thoughtful. He had not intervened, but he had observed everything. His legal mind had already begun organizing the situation into facts, actions, consequences. He glanced briefly at Danielle, then away, because he knew. She had already handled it, without him. Back at the center, Michael took a small step back, giving Danielle space again, but his presence remained. Steady, intentional. "Is there anything you need?" he asked. Danielle shook her head gently. "No," she said. "I just came here to meet my friend." Michael nodded once. "Then you're welcome here," he replied. And this time, there was no doubt in the room about what that meant. The lobby remained quiet, but no longer tense, no longer divided, just still, as if everyone present understood that something important had just happened, and that they would carry it with them long after they left. 1 week later, Chicago looked the same, but to Danielle Carter, it felt different. The wind still moved through the streets with the same restless energy. The trains still rattled overhead. People still rushed past each other with purpose, distraction, and distance. The city hadn't changed, but something inside her had. Danielle sat by the window of her apartment, a modest but thoughtfully arranged space on the 12th floor of a building overlooking the river. Morning light filtered softly through sheer curtains, casting a gentle glow across her living room. A cup of coffee rested untouched on the table beside her, long since cooled. Her phone lay in her hand, still buzzing. She looked down at the screen, scrolling slowly, not out of curiosity anymore, but out of quiet disbelief. Messages. Hundreds at first, then thousands. Now, more than she could count. Some were short. "Thank you for speaking up. I've been through the same thing. You said what I couldn't." Others were longer. Stories from strangers who had never met her, sharing moments of silence, of being judged, of choosing not to fight, and the cost of that silence. Danielle read them carefully, not all at once, one by one, because each message carried weight, because each voice felt real. She exhaled softly, placing her phone down for a moment and leaning back against the chair. Her eyes moved toward the window, watching the river flow steadily between the buildings. A week ago, she had felt invisible. Now, she felt seen, not because of what had happened to her, but because of what she had chosen to do with it. Her phone buzzed again. A new message, this one different. Professional, an invitation. "We would be honored to have you speak at our upcoming forum on equity and public spaces." Danielle stared at it for a moment. She hadn't expected this. She wasn't a speaker. She wasn't an activist. She was just someone who refused to stay silent. And somehow, that had become enough. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She stood, walking across the room, her steps unhurried. When she opened the door, Claire Whitman stood there, smiling. This time without tension, without urgency. Just warmth. "Hey," Claire said softly. Danielle smiled back. "Hey." Claire stepped inside without hesitation, as she always did, setting her bag down on the small table near the entrance. She looked around briefly, taking in the quiet calm of the apartment before turning her attention back to Danielle. "You've been avoiding me," Claire said lightly, though her tone carried more curiosity than accusation. Danielle shook her head with a small laugh. "Not avoiding," she replied. "Just processing." Claire nodded. She understood that. She stepped closer, her expression softening. "I've seen the messages," she said. "The video is everywhere." Danielle gave a small nod. "I know." There was a pause, then Claire reached out and wrapped her arms around Danielle. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't dramatic. Just steady, grounded. Danielle didn't hesitate. She hugged her back, and in that moment, something settled. "You didn't just stand up for yourself," Claire said quietly. "You stood up for so many others." Danielle closed her eyes for a brief second, then opened them again. "I didn't plan any of it," she said. Claire pulled back slightly, looking at her with a gentle smile. "That's what makes it real." Across the room, Danielle's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a call. Danielle walked over and picked it up, glancing at the screen. A name she recognized. Emma Collins. Danielle answered. "Hello." Emma's voice came through, slightly hesitant at first, but sincere. "Hi, Danielle, I hope it's okay that I'm calling." Danielle leaned lightly against the edge of the table. "It's okay," she said. "Hi, Emma." Emma exhaled softly, as if relieved. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, "and I wanted to apologize." Danielle's brow furrowed slightly. "For what?" "For not speaking up sooner," Emma replied. "I was there. I saw everything. I recorded it. But I didn't step in." Danielle was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled. Softly, though Emma couldn't see it. "You helped," she said, "in your own way." Emma paused, then laughed quietly, a little surprised. "I guess I did." There was a brief silence. Then Emma added, "I'd like to meet you sometime, if that's okay." Danielle glanced toward Claire, who gave a small, encouraging nod. "I'd like that," Danielle said. They ended the call, and just like that, something new began. Later that afternoon, across the city, another change was taking place. Inside a conference room at the Grand Lake Hotel, Michael Hayes stood at the head of a long table, speaking to a group of department managers. The atmosphere was serious, but focused. Behind him, a screen displayed a single phrase: "Respect is not optional." Michael's posture was steady, his tone calm but firm. "We failed," he said, "and we're not going to pretend otherwise." The room remained silent, listening. "We are implementing a mandatory training program," he continued. "Bias awareness, guest interaction, accountability at every level." A woman seated near the front, Angela Brooks, the head of human resources, nodded in agreement. She was in her late 30s, with a composed presence and sharp attention to detail. Her hair was styled neatly in a short, natural cut, and her expression carried both professionalism and empathy. She had spent years advocating for inclusive workplace policies, often pushing against resistance, but today, she didn't need to, because now everyone understood. Back in her apartment, Danielle stood once more by the window. The city stretched out before her, alive as ever, unchanged. And yet, she felt different standing in it, not because everything was fixed, not because the world had suddenly become fair, but because she knew something now that she hadn't fully believed before. Her voice mattered. She picked up her phone again, looking at the invitation message one more time. Then, slowly, she typed, "I'd be honored." Danielle set the phone down, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. She looked at herself, not critically, not cautiously, just honestly. Then she smiled. Outside, Chicago moved forward. Inside, so did she. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was walking alone. Not everyone sees the truth at first. In everyday life, we often judge quickly based on what we think we know instead of what is real. But this story reminds us that every person carries a story we cannot see, and respect should never depend on appearance. Sometimes, one quiet but brave action can change everything. Danielle did not shout. She did not fight with anger. She simply stood her ground and spoke the truth. And that was enough to open the eyes of many. In our daily lives, we may face moments where staying silent feels easier, but real change often begins when someone chooses to speak with courage and dignity. Justice does not always come from power. It often comes from the decision to do what is right, even when it is uncomfortable. Whether at work, in public, or within our own families, the way we treat others reflects who we truly are. Fairness, kindness, and respect are not optional values. They are responsibilities. Let this story be a reminder to look again before judging, to listen before assuming, and to stand up when something is wrong. Even small actions can create a ripple that reaches further than we imagine. If this story touched you, take a moment to share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from and what part of this story spoke to your heart. And if you believe in kindness, fairness, and standing up for what is right, type Amen in the comments. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories that inspire and change lives. May God bless you, protect your heart, and guide you to always choose what is right even when it is not easy.